Coming up on Bridge City News, two Lethbridge MLAs respond to Premier Jason Kenney's announcement that schools will be reopening this fall in Alberta. Federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer once again blasted Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over the We Charity scandal. And we hear from one of the leadership candidates who's hoping to replace Scheer this fall, and he explains why he's the best person for the job.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Students will be getting off the couch and back into the classroom this fall. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney and the UCP announced yesterday that all schools will be reopening in September. The Lethbridge School Division has made plans for the restructuring of schools. The superintendent of schools for the Lethbridge School Division, Cheryl Gilmore, says the class sizes will stay the same for students depending upon if parents want to bring their children back.
Certainly our class sizes won't change because under scenario one, of course, all students come to school. In terms of what the class size will end up being lies entirely with how many parents decide that they won't be sending their children to school. And so depending upon that, we may have to reconfigure classes, because if we have a number of students who are parents who are wanting their students to learn at home, we'll have to assign staff to cohorts of students learning at home, which means the possibility of reconfiguring classes in schools.
Gilmore says the masks will not be mandatory for students, but parents can provide masks for their children if they would like to. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf says with schools reopening this fall, all necessary precautions will be taken to protect our kids from COVID-19.
Well, it's something as an entire community we have to work at together. There's very simple physical things that we can do: washing our hands, covering our mouths when we cough, physical distancing. But at the end of the day, as a community, with something like this, we all face certain risks, and whether we become paralyzed by life and not do anything, or whether we move ahead successfully, doing everything responsibly that we can for the best outcome for kids. I've heard from hundreds of parents, they want their kids back in classrooms because that's the best learning environment for them. And yes, we want to focus on safety.
Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips does not agree. She says that the move to reopen schools is going too quick, especially with coronavirus cases spiking in our province.
Well, I think what we need is an accurate picture of what the actual spread of the virus is right now. And an accurate picture of what the government's plan is going to be as that changes over time. So right now, we don't have projections on infection rates, whereas we did a few months ago. And the government simply hasn't released those, I guess because they want to make the case for sending kids back to school with no extra resources. But I don't think these things should be political. I am really, really worried about my community safety in the fall. Under these circumstances, for example, there is no way that my kids are going to be visiting with their grandparents.
One group that is not happy about the UCP's back-to-school relaunch is the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees. The group says that the government's plans are not putting health and safety first. The AUP is also calling for the rehiring of about 6,000 substitute teachers and 20,000 support staff who were laid off when schools closed last March.
The cleaning standards that are going to have to be higher than they were before COVID means you need extra staff for cleaning. If you don't have those extra staff for cleaning, because everything's got to be wiped down all the time. And if you don't have that extra staff and extra cleaning, how are you going to maintain those high standards at a time when COVID is spiking again? Occupational health and safety issues in relationship to COVID are paramount, and we are not seeing that addressed. And we need full employment and more than before in order to ensure a safe relaunch for the students.
The province says they plan on reopening schools under near normal operations. Calgary City Council recently voted to make wearing masks indoors mandatory for the Stampede City beginning August 1st. Council also agreed that all transit riders need to wear them as well. Now, some of the exceptions would be when people are eating at restaurants or working out at a gym. Now, we asked Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman if our city is considering a similar bylaw.
The number of positive cases in Lethbridge, in the city, has more than doubled. So last Wednesday, there were 18 cases. As of yesterday, there were 37. We heard yesterday that the province is going to be mandating students return to school in September. And I think in the city, we need to see numbers turn around. We can't have the number of positive cases doubling every week. If we want to maintain our business community and support them, it's going to be important that we all wear masks. Masks are shown to be an effective form of prevention. And so in order to have a healthy economy, we have to do everything in our power to conform with the recommendations of the Medical Officer of Health.
Bill 30 has been getting a lot of attention lately regarding healthcare in rural Alberta. Many doctors are against it and have threatened to leave the province. Now, there is one doctor in Drumheller, however, who's in favor of the bill because it addresses racism and discrimination. BCN's Jeanette Rocher has more. Jeanette?
Well, Hal, the physician's name is Dr. Ritesh Ram. He is the founder of Riverside Medical in Drumheller, and he went so far as to send an open letter this week to Premier Jason Kenney to discuss the merits of Bill 30, specifically as it relates to discrimination, racism, and physician compensation. His letter says, quote, "Unfortunately, there are doctors who engage in acts of discrimination, harassment, racism, sexual harassment, and bullying, purposefully and maliciously to advance their agendas." He goes on to say that he and his physician wife and young family have experienced this firsthand from doctors in his area. He says, quote, "The doctors engaging in this behavior seem to continue deliberately because of our closed profession," end quote.
I've personally experienced unacceptable behavior, and it is out there. We see it in a lot of industries, and ours is really no different. So in this sense, that's what Bill 30 is trying to address as a start. So it's advancing and having more public in all the committees that deal with physician reviews, and that is going to be a start of how that moves forward.
Dr. Ram says he's very pleased that Bill 30 looks to balance the public interests and transparency of how doctors police themselves by increasing the number of public members appointed to their complaint review committees.
What I'm encouraged about when it comes to Bill 30 is how it's moving in the direction of actually helping and addressing the discrimination that is happening in all the industries, but also how it's also going to move forward with different aspects of physician compensation.
He says that as a rural general physician, he supports the government's decision for change, but feels that more is still needed, and that's what he hopes to discuss with the Premier. For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Rocher.
Strength and conditioning are two of the most important aspects of working out. And for younger teen girls, some of them have not stepped foot in a gym. As Micah Quinn explains, the Lethbridge Fitness Collective is offering an introduction into weight training, strength training, and conditioning exercises for young girls.
Weightlifting and box jumps are just a few of the lessons that will be taught by Emily Melmoth in her workout classes for teen girls aged 14 to 17.
A lot of it's about empowerment, right? And it's not just going to be telling them what to do each class. I'm going to hopefully they'll understand the why of why we do things, and why we do certain exercises and why we use certain form, and what the importance of doing certain exercises is.
Melmoth has a few tips and tricks for teaching weightlifting and strength and condition exercises.
Basically, a few of the keys are to keep the weight in your heels, as well as to keep your knees kind of out and prevent them from caving in. Go as low as your hip mobility will let you. It's very strength-based, and like this you obviously need the leg strength as well, but it's more recruiting, I guess it's faster, so it's recruiting your fast twitch muscles. So it's just kind of a different training style, I suppose, to accomplish a different thing.
Melmoth hopes that these training sessions will help these young girls feel as comfortable as possible in a gym scenario and allow them to be able to work out in as safe a way as possible. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Some realtors in rural Alberta are reporting a surge in home buying by those who are fleeing the big cities. They say a big reason for the boom is the impact COVID-19 has had on areas with high density and congestion.
We've seen people coming out of Vancouver. We've seen people coming out of Calgary. They're really looking at rural Alberta as a different spin on life. With COVID, I think a lot of people took a really good chance to sit down and think about life and what's important. And they're really looking at these smaller communities because it's a better life out here. In the springtime, we see a lot of listings coming on, and the listings come on, they usually start mid-March depending on the weather, and then they get higher and higher as it goes on. on. And then once June, everybody pretty much, they didn't list their houses in the spring when we were under full quarantine. And then in June, once it loosened up a bit, all of a sudden everybody wanted to list their houses again, and it was back to go. So we had a ton of buyers out. We've had a ton of people wanting to list their properties, and properties, if they're priced right, they're flying off the market.
Lethbridge police need our help finding a 21-year-old male wanted for aggravated assault. Police say it's in connection with an incident that occurred at a home on Mount Blackiston Road over the weekend, where a 26-year-old man was taken to a Calgary hospital with severe head injuries. A warrant has been issued for the arrest of Brady Robert Tardif of Calgary, who is charged with aggravated assault and 2 counts of failing to comply with release orders. If you have any information that can help police, give them a call at 403-328-4444. A 34-year-old Calgary man has been charged with terrorism-related offenses. This follows a 7-year investigation by the RCMP's Integrated National Security Enforcement Team. Police say between May of 2013 and June of 2014, Hussein Sobhi Borhat traveled to Syria, where he contributed to activities of a terrorist group, the Islamic State. Following a judicial hearing, Borhat was remanded in custody and will appear in Calgary Provincial Court on Friday. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was grilled in the House of Commons recently about the Liberal government's initial choice to have We Charity administer a $900 million student grant program. Tory leader Andrew Scheer accused Trudeau of using the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse for corruption. Trudeau says he regrets not recusing himself from deliberations.
Nothing to see here, just move on. Don't ask any of the tough questions. Tough questions about the relationship with an organization that paid members of his family cash, that took administration fees for running sole source government contracts after breaking their bank covenants and having members of their board resign. Now, the Prime Minister is trying to hide behind the public service on this one, but I'd like to ask him a very simple question. On what basis would the public service have made their recommendation that we was the only organization that could deliver this program?
When we came forward with the idea of supporting young people who would want to be involved and serve their community across the country, we as a government came forward and looked to see young people serving their country. The public service took a look at the ways they could deliver that program and determined that the We organization was the only one that could deliver that program as ambitious as it was for this summer. That was the recommendation made by the nonpartisan public service. Of course, as I apologize for, I should have recused myself because of the connection with the families, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the public service recommended that organization.
As a side note, Trudeau has agreed to appear before the House of Commons Finance Committee to answer to the Liberal government giving We Charity a contract to run the $900 million student volunteer program. The date and time have not yet been finalized. The Conservative Party of Canada will be picking its new leader this fall. One of the candidates is current MP Erin O'Toole. Mr. O'Toole joined me on Bridge City News recently, and I asked him if he were to become leader and then Prime Minister, would he let people vote with their hearts and their conscience, especially if they're pro-life?
And so I'm very proud that there's a lot of social conservatives with me who say, yeah, you might be a little more moderate than me on some issues, but you've always respected my role and my views in this party. You're going to respect free votes, the freedom of MPs to bring up issues that are important to them from their faith or cultural background. I think that's a strength of our party, Hal. I've defended it since day one. It was Peter MacKay who used terms like albatross and other things that I think shows he would divide the party. I will unite us.
Mr. O'Toole will also explain how he would bring home the 2 Canadian Michaels being held hostage in China. That's coming up in the second half of our show. Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says complaints against the Governor-General need to be followed up on. There are reports that Julie Payette has created a toxic work environment. Singh questions if Payette is even suitable for the role and says complaints against her should be taken seriously.
Yeah, I want to say, first off, that it's tough to come forward. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And so thank you for coming forward and sharing your stories. I also want workers to know that they shouldn't be afraid to come forward. I think we need better whistleblower protection or protection for workers who do make complaints. And I want people to take you seriously. Like, you've made some serious complaints. There should be a serious follow-up. You deserve that. And that's what we're asking for today. That's why I'm saying that the Prime Minister has a role to play, that you shouldn't feel like you're alone in this. And I'm going to help ensure that there is some follow-up. Lots of folks have asked the question today, and I haven't directly said that. I think the first step really truly is to follow up with these complaints.
Family members of victims were joined by supporters in a march today demanding a public inquiry into the April mass shooting that left 22 people dead in Nova Scotia. The event was organized by families of the victims to protest the delay in calling a full public inquiry more than 3 months after the April rampage.
We demand answers! We demand answers!
They know they screwed it up and they just got to start and admit it, and we got to start somewhere. To admit you made mistakes, improve the mistakes, and move forward. It's been 3 months, and I haven't had one call from anybody. So how long does one wait? Well, I think half Nova Scotia should be here. We get Nova Scotia Strong stickers everywhere, and I think it's got to start somewhere, and I hope it doesn't stop until they fix the problem. That's what I want.
That probe is not, we want full public inquiry. With that, people are like, why the word, why the word? I mean, it gets into the politics and the laws, but I mean, it opens up a lot that everything's transparent, everything's out, and for us, you know, we deserve answers.
Closer to home and fresh off of news that the CFL club Edmonton is dropping the name Eskimos, comes word that the league has decided to play a shortened season in Winnipeg if they can get money from Ottawa and an agreement with the players. Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister hopes hosting the CFL would give his province an economic shot in the arm without a spike in COVID-19 cases. Pallister says having hundreds of players and staff in the city would help the hotel and food industries. He also says having the players tested frequently and kept separate from the public would ensure safety for everyone. It was a great day for tossing a football today, sunny and hot, and that should be the trend for the rest of the week. Full weather details are on deck. Another gorgeous day in Lethbridge. Load up on the sunscreen for those hot sunny days. We'll be sticking around for a little while longer. Jeanette Rocher is here now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, this week is all about sunglasses and sunscreen.
Yeah, that's right, Hal. We're going to be seeing tons and tons of sunshine this week. A little bit of wind too, though. As we get into this evening, we're going to be seeing clear skies overnight. 13 degrees is the high. We could see a southwesterly wind coming in, gusting at 50 kilometers per hour. And into tomorrow, that wind could actually gust up to 60 kilometers per hour. But look at the temperature there. 29 degrees is the high tomorrow with lots of sunshine and an overnight low tomorrow evening of 11 degrees. And then as we look into the 5-day forecast, we're going to be seeing much the same. Look at all that sunshine getting into the weekend there. Friday's high 27 under sunny skies. Sunshine all weekend long. Saturday and Sunday 25 degrees is the high. 30 degrees expected for next Monday and 32 for Tuesday as we head into next week with beautiful hot sunny weather as well. Now the ALMANAC averages for this time of year, 26 degrees is the high on average, and we're certainly hitting above that now. 11 degrees is the average low. 37 was the high temperature on this day. That was back in 1938, and the low temperature was 4. That was back in 1984. The sun rose this morning at 5:49 a.m. and our sun set this evening at 9:27 p.m., giving us a long, wonderful summer days of daylight there. Let's take a look at what's happening across the country tomorrow. Now, we're going to be seeing tons of rain everywhere except Lethbridge. Victoria, 23 degrees is the high there. Vancouver, 21. Could see some showers. Both Calgary and Edmonton could see a risk of thunderstorms tomorrow. Same thing happening across Saskatchewan tomorrow. Saskatoon's high, 31. 32 in Regina, but all that humidity building up into a chance of thunderstorms. Winnipeg, though, sunny skies, 29 degrees there. And then over in Toronto, 27 the high with a mix of sun and cloud. 26 expected for both Ottawa and Montreal with partly cloudy skies there as well. Now, as we take a look into Atlantic Canada, we have had some heat warnings in effect, but those have lifted now, specifically in Halifax. Halifax high tomorrow, 26. They could see a possibility of a thunderstorm. Same thing for Fredericton tomorrow. 23 is the high there. 22 the high in Charlottetown with a chance of rain. And mix of sun and cloud over in St. John's, Newfoundland tomorrow is expected. And their high tomorrow, 25 degrees. So there you go. Lots of rain across the country, but over here in Lethbridge, plenty of sunshine. Drink your water and grab your sunglasses. There you go. That's your weather.
The U.S. government has signed a contract with Pfizer for the delivery of the first 100 million doses of a COVID-19 vaccine expected in December. Government officials say the U.S. could purchase another 500 million doses under a new agreement. Pfizer and BioNTech SE announced that the agreement is with the Department of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Defense Department for a vaccine candidate the companies are developing. It is part of U.S. President Donald Trump's Operation Warp Speed program, under which multiple COVID-19 vaccines are being developed simultaneously. Social enterprise in southern Alberta will be receiving a financial boost thanks to funds from the Community Foundation of Lethbridge and the Community Foundation of Southeastern Alberta. The program is part of an $18.5 million cross-country initiative. Through the IRP, social purpose organizations can apply for a minimum $10,000 grant to design, plan, and measure to participate in Canada's growing social finance market. 4 groups, including the Friends of Medalto Society, the Lethbridge Youth Foundation, and the Rotary Club at Pincher Creek, received just under $100,000. CP Railway beat expectations for second quarter results, even though its net income decreased 12.3% to $635 million. Adjusted net income for the quarter was $553 million, or $4.07 per share. That surpassed analysts' expectations of $3.78 per share. The Calgary-based railway is forecasting adjusted earnings growth in 2020 despite the second quarter results. A&W Revenue Royalties Income Fund says COVID-19 took a big bite out of its second quarter as net income dropped 44% from a year ago to $4.24 million. The fast food chain says same-store sales plunged 31.6% as 230 of its 971 outlets in its royalty pool were closed at the height of the pandemic. Only 21 remained shuttered by the end of the quarter, though the chain was restricted to drive-through operations and mobile ordering for a 3-month period. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 8 points on the day to finish at 16,171. The Dow was up 165 points to 27,005. The S&P 500 was up 18 points to 3276, and the Nasdaq was up 25 points on the day to finish at 10,706. Oil was down 3 cents to $41.89 per barrel. Natural gas was up 2 cents to $1.69. Gold was up 13 cents to $18.7155 an ounce, and silver was down 2 cents to $22.98 an ounce. Wheat is at $237 per metric ton, barley's at $247, canola's at $484, and corn is at $233 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 35 cents to $101.50, feeder cattle were up 20 cents to $141.53, and lean hogs were up $1.76 to $52.65. The Canadian dollar was up slightly on the day to 74.54 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman says at this point, our city is not looking into a similar bylaw to Calgary's, which would make wearing masks indoors mandatory, including on transit buses. Chris Spearman did say, however, that the issue will be discussed at Monday night's City Council meeting. Calgary, by the way, which has 589 active COVID-19 cases, voted 12-3 to bring forth the bylaw on August 1st, making masks mandatory indoors except for eating in a restaurant or working out at a gym. The federal Conservatives will be choosing their new leader this fall, and one of the frontrunners is Aaron O'Toole. We sat down for an exclusive one-on-one chat with MP Aaron O'Toole and asked why he feels he's the best candidate for the job. That interview is coming up shortly. The Conservative Party of Canada will be choosing its new leader this fall. The 4 candidates running to replace Andrew Scheer are Peter MacKay, Leslyn Lewis, Derek Sloan, and our next guest, Aaron O'Toole, joining me via Skype from Ottawa. Aaron, welcome to BCN.
Good to be with you, Hal.
First of all, let me ask you, why do you think you are the best candidate for the job?
Well, I've got the most experience. I served in the military for 12 years, worked in the private sector for 10 years, lived all across this country during my military tour. And then I served in the Harper cabinet, where I turned around a very troubled portfolio by setting out a vision, building a team, and taking on our adversaries, in that case, a public sector union. And I'm in the House of Commons now, Hal. You know, out of the contestants in this race, only Derek and I are current sitting MPs. I'm really the only one that can win this next election. I've won 3 times in the suburbs of Toronto. That's the region we really have to win more seats. I'm a true Conservative. I fight back against those who try and attack the Conservative Party and our members, and I can win where we need to win, and I'm ready to go in September. So I think overall, there's great people in this race. They're all my friends, but if we want to win and take the country back from Trudeau, I'm the choice.
Now, you say you're a true conservative. Some people, Aaron, say you're kind of a red Tory, that only Leslyn Lewis and Derek Sloan are the true social conservatives. So how will you win votes from those who call themselves true blue?
Well, look, our conservative family has a range of folks, people that describe themselves as libertarian, social conservative, fiscal conservatives, foreign policy hawks on Israel and other things. I'm pretty blue on all elements. I do respect human rights and the decisions of our courts, but I'll tell you on issues of religious freedom, conscience protections, I was the first candidate to put out significant policies on these. I've supported free votes for all MPs, free speech for MPs. It's fundamental to our party. Peter MacKay obviously has changed his position on a lot of these things. So you can analyze each candidate and say who has 100% of what you're looking for. But if you do that across the board, Hal, it will be different for libertarians, red Tories, fiscal conservatives. I think overall, my military time, private sector, cabinet time, I'm strong on law and order and other issues. I'm true blue, but I want to keep the party united by respecting all views.
So, Aaron, let me ask you something then. You're going to have some MPs within your rank and file who are going to vote with their conscience and their heart, that are maybe pro-life. They view the traditional marriage as the only type of marriage that's around. So if you become party leader and they become prime minister, would you allow them to vote with their conscience, or will they have to fall into the party line?
With their conscience, absolutely. In fact, Hal, I think that's a strength of our party. Our party is actually the only one in Ottawa that is a true cross-section of Canada. People have a number of backgrounds and views, sometimes motivated by their faith and moral convictions. That is a true representation of Canada. We should not have political parties that are just reflections of the leader. Justin Trudeau wants his MPs to view everything the same way he does. I think that's corrupting democracy, to be honest with you. So I saw how Stephen Harper respected all views in the Conservative government he led for 10 years. We were able to make sure everyone was valued. And so I'm very proud that there's a lot of social conservatives with me who say, yeah, you might be a little more moderate than me on some issues, but you've always respected my role and my views in this party. You're going to respect free votes, the freedom of MPs to bring up issues that are important to them from their faith or cultural background. I think that's a strength of our party, Hal. I've defended it since day one. It was Peter MacKay who used terms like albatross and other things that I think shows he would divide the party. I will unite us.
So some people say you're more socially liberal but fiscally conservative, Aaron. Are you willing to march in the Gay Pride Parade next year, should it take place?
Well, when this issue came up, Peter MacKay said he was marching in the Toronto Pride Parade and wanted to call on all other candidates to do the same. I said I would not, because that parade has really become a left-wing expression. They don't allow police or military. They have anti-Israel floats. So I said I would not participate. But at the appropriate way where I can show support for all Canadians, including LGBT Canadians, as leader, I think we have to show that our party is welcoming of everyone. And that means in a diverse democracy like ours, we will have to sort of say, people that don't want the leader to march have to understand why I would make sure that I would show respect for people. The same way, Hal, I've said that MPs should not be forced to march either. That's part of our freedom as a country, is to make sure that people can participate or not, can have their values respected. That's what I will defend as leader.
So Aaron, what qualities would you say that you have over arguably your biggest competitor, Peter MacKay?
Well, certainly the biggest thing, I think, I'm the next generation of leadership, Hal. I was Stephen Harper's last cabinet minister. I've been in politics for 7 years. I've been in cabinet, I've got real experience, but I'm not a career politician. Peter was elected in the 90s, and he's not strong with the media. You've seen in this race, he has flip-flopped on everything from Jerusalem to other things. I think if that happens, the Liberal war room and the media will eat us alive. I've never had an issue with losing a debate. I'm strong in the media, I'm principled, and I know my files. I can take the fight back to the left and actually win. I win as a strong conservative in the Toronto area where we only have a few people. So I'm able to win the next election. Peter MacKay's not in the House, he can't win. And I really want to make sure we find a seat for Leslyn And Derek's already in the House. He's a colleague. I have a good relationship with him. We will unite and win, but I think I'm the only one that can do that for our party.
You know, I've noticed as well, there's a little bit of back and forth between you and Peter MacKay. You know, the two camps taking shots at each other, Aaron. It says in the Bible, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. So shouldn't we see more of a united front when it comes to the Conservative Party of Canada candidates?
Well, you'll see, I have great respect for Peter MacKay. He was a very good defense minister under Stephen Harper. As a veteran who had friends that served in the Afghanistan war, I can say that. I say probably as many nice things about Peter every day. But it's important for us to really scrutinize the candidates. Who's been tested? Who under pressure performs? Who is going to be able to hold Trudeau to account for his poor judgment and ethical failings, or who will have their own history of gaffes and mistakes drawn out? I think a lot of our members thought that we didn't have a tough enough leadership last time because on the campaign trail, our leader, Andrew Scheer, was surprised by a number of things. He hadn't really been put through the pressure of a race with 14 candidates. So I'm being tough but fair in this race to show that I've stood by my principles. I've defended them. I like to joke with my wife. My biggest accomplishment is I'm scandal-free in my time in politics, and I will keep it that way because we need to be smarter and more disciplined than the Liberals because they've got most of the media on their side. We have them working against us, so we need a leader that's principled and professional.
Now, speaking of scandals, I'm glad you brought that up. There's more controversy surrounding Prime Minister Justin Trudeau with the We Charity scandal. Now, this isn't the first ethics issue involving our Prime Minister. We don't have to look too far back, including SNC-Lavalin, the Aga Khan trip, not to mention the blackface controversy. Why is it that nothing seems to stick to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau? Many refer to him as the Teflon man.
Well, I can tell you, in the last election last fall, voters in my province, in Southern Ontario, where there's 80 seats, if they were looking to move away from Trudeau. And I think we did not run a good enough campaign. I think most Canadians know Trudeau is very phony. They know he's incompetent on the economy, and they will be looking who is ready to govern, particularly coming out of a crisis with $1 trillion debt, a $343 billion deficit. Who is ready? That's why I think being in the House, being someone that's held my own under fire, you know, Leslyn Lewis has run a good campaign, but has never been really tested, hasn't been elected. I want her to get a seat and join our caucus and be a strong voice. But who can hold up under the withering fire of the Liberals, the NDP, the Green, and the media? It's me. If we can do that, Hal, I think a lot of swing voters are tired of Trudeau. They know he was late in his response to the COVID crisis. And now this ethical scandal where his family has benefited and he was helping friends, and we're talking about a children's charity here. I think a lot of Canadians are saying it's time for ethical, principled leadership, and that's what the Conservative Party can offer.
Aaron, you talk a lot about the seats to be won in Ontario. What about Quebec? How can the Conservatives win in Quebec? What needs to be done?
Je suis le seul candidat bilingue, Hal. I'm the only candidate really ready for the debates. Mr. MacKay has had difficulties with his French, despite being in politics since the 1990s. Derek did fairly well for someone picking it up, actually. Ms. Lewis does not speak French. There's 25% of our seats are in Quebec. So I learned my French in the military. I joke when I'm in Quebec that I sound like an Anglophone soldier because that's how I learned my French in the military. But I'm ready to win debates in both French and English because I've got the capacity and I've got the strength to beat Trudeau and Blanchette, because I think Quebecers actually need a seat at the table. They don't need this separatist protest party. They need to see us as a viable force. I was on an interview in French with Saguenay Radio this morning talking about energy actually in the Saguenay region. So I'm confident we can win more seats there too.
How about energies? Let's get that pipeline built. What are your thoughts? Instead of having our tankers go all the way through the Panama Canal. I mean, come on, that's ridiculous.
You're right, it's ridiculous. That's why this is the second leadership, Hal, I've run on a National Strategic Pipelines Act, where I will make cabinet upfront decision to approve any pipeline that goes to Tidewater or to refinement capability in Canada. Those are in the national interest, and we need a prime minister that can articulate that. It's interesting, Before I joined the military, Hal, my first real job, inspecting pipeline for TransCanada Pipeline. So I've also worked in and around energy, even as a lawyer later on, and I've been a strong voice as an Ontario MP, because the whole country needs to understand that our energy success, the innovation in our oil and gas sector, is a win for all of Canada. And that's what the national interest pipeline approach that I will champion will help tell Canadians. We need to get the best possible price for our resources. I'll fight for this.
Aaron, you made mention of the fact that our deficit is over $340 billion, the debt is over $1 trillion. How would you help balance the books and bring us back to black, especially during tough times like this during COVID-19?
Well, we have to take a page from Stephen Harper and the late Jim Flaherty, who did this very effectively after the last global recession in 2009. They had a disciplined plan to get back to balance. It took 5 years in that case, but they held the line. No raising of taxes and a clear private sector rebuilding. That's what I'm offering. This will be a process that will likely be a decade to get the fiscal house under control while keeping taxes low. We actually may need to provide some additional supports for small businesses who are failing right now, but we also need a renaissance in the private sector. We need the energy sector to rebound. We need a softwood lumber agreement. We've had dozen mills, forestry mills close across the country, Hal. We've had bad trade agreements under Trudeau. So we see the auto industry, GM in my riding, where my dad worked when I was a kid, closing this last December after making cars for a century. So we're becoming very uncompetitive as a country, and we have to grow to our GDP to make sure as people come off these programs like the CERB and others, they need jobs. So I will make sure we have a private sector renaissance while we get our spending under control, while keeping taxes low. That is the special approach we need to have.
What about the support for our farmers? A lot of people in southwestern Alberta, are very passionate about that too, our agriculture sector.
Yes, in fact, I'm very fortunate to have the support and special advice of Jerry Ritz, who was the agriculture minister under Prime Minister Harper, very well regarded. We've talked about the need to diversify our markets. We're going to see more disruptions as the global community takes on China and some of their actions with respect to the WHO, with respect to trade. So we need to diversify, and we need to make sure that some of the insurance and crop support programs are bankable and are much more predictable for farming families, because there's been uncertainty in their income, and these are meant to sort of be backstops. We have to fix that. I'm committed to doing that as well. So I think opening new markets, getting the best possible price for beef, pork, grain, oilseeds, it's a critical part of our export market. I've worked on this in the Harper government, and with help and advice from people like Jerry Ritz and others across Western Canada, we're going to make sure agriculture remains a cornerstone of our economy.
Now, the controversy surrounding the extradition of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou continues. Many argue that China arrested the two Canadians, Michael Spavor, Michael Kovrig, in retaliation at the arrest of Meng Wanzhou. Now, the PM has stated that he will not do a prisoner exchange because it would make other Canadians and put their lives at risk. They'll be in jeopardy now. How else can we bring the two Michaels home who are being charged with spying, and Aaron could potentially face the death penalty?
Yes, I said from the beginning, Trudeau has dropped the ball on the two Michaels, particularly because they didn't very quickly reach out and engage at a senior level after they were arrested. And by the time months later they tried, China wouldn't return their call. I've said, when I become Prime Minister, I will give 30 days for the Michaels to be released, or Magnitsky sanctions will be levied against certain officials in the Chinese regime. These sanctions we've used against Russia, Venezuela. When corrupt state actors are abusing the international rule of law, that should be used. Sure, it is as much symbolic as anything else, but then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask some of our allies to take the same approach to sanction communist officials for these actions. This is stealing the liberty of people because they want to pressure Canada to release a sort of someone who's almost royalty within the communist system because of the Huawei connections. We need to stand up as a country for the values we believe in, and have other countries of a democratic nature like Australia, the UK, the United States do it with us. I've been the strongest voice against communist China for the last 5 years. I've passed bills in the House. I asked Trudeau about WHO corruption with China 2 years ago in the House of Commons. So with me, we will have a principled foreign policy, and we will stand for our values and our allies again.
Conservative Party of Canada leadership candidate Aaron O'Toole, thanks for joining me today from Ottawa.
Thank you, Hal.
The federal Conservatives are saying that if Prime Minister Justin Trudeau does not step down and Liberal MPs don't force him out, then they're accepting corruption. This, of course, is in reaction to the We Charity scandal, which has rocked the Hill. To talk more about it is political reporter Brian Lilly. Brian, the Bloc is even saying that Trudeau should step aside for Deputy PM Chrystia Freeland.
Yeah, both parties, let's be honest with this, Hal, both parties playing a bit of mischief in politics with this. I don't blame them for saying the PM should step down over this. It's serious, it's sketchy in terms of the way that his government, with all the ties between the Trudeau Liberals and the We Charity, how they were able to give this almost $1 billion contract, $912 million. It would pay We more than $43 million to administer the program, how they were able to get this through without anyone ever recusing themselves. But, you know, the Conservatives are trying to say, oh, you bad people, if you don't force Justin Trudeau out, you're standing with corruption. And then the Bloc's over there on the other side, and they had several questions. Justin Trudeau took a personal day on Monday, but since then they've been asking questions saying, will you step aside for Chrystia Freeland? They're honestly just trying to drive a wedge between Trudeau and Freeland. And, you know, as a political junkie, it is kind of fun to watch. I'll admit that.
As for the We Charity scandal itself and how much Justin Trudeau's family and friends benefited, our PM really hasn't said very much.
No, he's still trying to pawn this off on the what he keeps calling the professional public service or the nonpartisan public service. He's trying to say that, well, it wasn't really his government. You know, well, we didn't make this decision. They did. Those guys over there. Yeah, that's the ticket. It's a bit like an old Saturday Night Live skit. Well, look, we had testimony from Rachel Wernick, who's the senior bureaucrat on this file, last week. And she said clearly that We was pitching the government. Now, there's nothing wrong with We pitching the government on a proposal. The government shoveling money out the door. We wants to make a proposal. They probably should have registered to lobby. Turns out they have not. And that's another issue. But as far as them pitching the government and saying, we can help you, we've got all these ideas for helping youth during the pandemic, no issue with that. The government, though, keeps saying, we didn't make a decision on this. This was all the idea of the public service. We was pitching Ministers Chagger, who's in charge of the program, and Minister Ng at the least. There are probably others, in addition to senior civil servants throughout the government, by mid-April. Bardish Chagger admits that she met with Craig Kielburger, the co-founder of We, on April 27th. Why is that important? That is 5 days before the government even mentioned the program in public. And on the day that the PM mentions it, Rachel Wernick, that top public servant, gets a detailed proposal sent to her by Craig Kielburger because he knew what was coming down the pipe. You know, you can't say that this is all on the public service when so many politicians are actually involved.
Now, Brian, you've done a lot of digging into the real estate surrounding We and the Kielburger family. Now, your contention is that they have some odd transactions and really owe Canadians an explanation. Why is that?
They owe Canadians an explanation because this is a family that has really rose to prominence through their charity and through their association with We. Now, not all the properties involved are or were owned by We. Some of them were owned by private companies set up by the Kielburger family, but often they were used by We or affiliated with We in some way. And some of these, in my research, what I found is that they sold below the assessed market value by the city. Now, I don't know how things run in Alberta, but if you remember from your time in Ontario, Hal, the city assessment of your property is normally well below what you could sell the place for or even what you bought it for. The city assessment trails the market value and is just used to determine what your tax rate will be. I don't know why it's like that, but it is. And when you're selling $1 million property for $250,000 or more, less than what the city assesses it at, that raises red flags. There are also a lot of transactions with family property where it goes from one family member to another, to another, to a numbered company. And, in one case, the price went from 3.7 million to zero to 800,000 to zero again before ending up in the hands of a numbered company owned by the in-law of Craig Kielburger. And you're sitting there saying, okay, what's this about? And you can't just say, well, it's personal. We don't have to tell you. No, this is strange. I showed it to people who were involved in real estate for a quarter century, and they say, I've seen a lot of transfers between family members, but this is odd.
Now, there have been some questions raised as to paying people to volunteer, which essentially means it's not really volunteering, and the amount of money on offer could range from $5 to $10 an hour, which is well below minimum wage. What has the government said about this?
Well, they've said it wasn't really a wage, and that's something that they tried to defend extensively at committee this week. But it's one of the reasons that groups like Volunteer Canada said they wouldn't participate with this once we said they would agree. We took on the contract and then said, oh, we don't know how to place people with volunteers. We're really good at engaging youth, but how do we place people? Let's ask Volunteer Canada to help out. They had several meetings. Volunteer Canada looked and said, wait, you're going to pay people? Oh, yeah. It's to incentivize them. Okay, but you're paying them less than minimum wage. Yet don't worry about that. Volunteer Canada stepped aside. At its best, it would be $10 an hour because you get a reward based on 100 hour of volunteer community service increments. So if you volunteer 100 hours, you get $1,000. That works out to $10 an hour. But Hal, if I went to a community group and I put in 190 hours, well, I'm still only getting $1,000 for that 100 hours. The other 90 hours doesn't count. Labor lawyers, the New Democrats, lots of volunteer groups have raised red flags and said, this is bizarre. Some charities have even said this puts us in a liability risk if we participate in such a program because we are effectively paying people to come out, but we're not paying them what the provincial minimum wage is. We're not following labor standards. This causes problems for us. The government has said, oh, no, you're completely misunderstanding. Just look the other way. I don't think that you actually can.
Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper was recently quoted in a British newspaper as saying that Canada and the UK should not rely so heavily on China. Brian, this comes at the same time a poll says Canadians want less economic reliance on the Asian nation.
There's a very well-written op-ed in the Daily Telegraph out of London, and I highly recommend it. If you follow me on social media, you can find it, or follow Stephen Harper on social media, you will find this. And he looks at what he's calling the Indo-Pacific century. And he says we've got two choices as a country. We can, try and play up to China, or we can play up to India and other free-minded democratic type countries like India, Japan, places like Singapore, Australia, and South Korea and others who don't have the same despotic, dictatorial view of the world that China does. And he commends Britain for walking away from making Huawei part of their 5G network and says, we need to make a decision. He calls on Canada to make the same decision. Under the Trudeau government, that's doubtful at this point. But because of the two Michaels, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, because of the Huawei controversy, because of the trade war that China's launched against Canada, Canadian public opinion is turning against the dictators in Beijing. And more people are saying, and the latest is an Ipsos poll saying, you know what? This simply isn't worth it. We need to look elsewhere. I'm glad to see that happening. I've been an advocate for more than 15 years of greater ties with India, which, although there are problems with democracy in India, it is still a democracy, and it's far more in line with our values in terms of the structure of the government than what the people running in Beijing see as the right way to go.
Now, Brian, let's turn our attention now to the COVID-19 pandemic. Alberta briefly jumped to become the province with the highest number of active COVID-19 cases per capita. Ontario has also seen a recent jump in the amount of younger people infected with the virus. Is this what we're calling a second wave right now?
I don't think we're quite at the second wave because we're not through the first, but both are seeing upticks. And it's interesting that the media jumped in and said, oh, look, Alberta, you guys opened way too fast, and that's why you've got the most active cases per capita. Well, they still have fewer cases than Ontario or Quebec, but it's interesting that they jumped on that stat. In Ontario, after weeks of going down, they started to tick up the way. And, I'll give you one example in particular. Ottawa, town you know well, it's gone up. Well, most of the people are under the age of 39. And there's been talk of major house parties being vectors for this. The Byward Market, which is a restaurant and bar district, there have been photos of people doing anything but social distancing. So, look, we're opening back up, but you still have to be careful. You still have to make sure that you practice some good public health guidelines, and some people aren't. And that's the problem here. So are we going to see the hospitals start spiking back up if a bunch of people under 40 get this? Not in the same way we would if people over 60 got it, but it's still a cause for concern, because if it becomes wider spread, then it starts spreading to older demographics who are more vulnerable. This is unlike swine flu of a few years ago, which disproportionately affected young people and children. This affects older people. And in swine flu, they weren't bothered by it. It didn't bug them at all. So we've got to watch how this spreads through the community. And right now, there's some worrying signals in both Alberta and Ontario, and I'm sure other provinces if we looked.
It's interesting too. I went for a hike to Red Rock Canyon at Waterton Lakes National Park, beautiful area, the past weekend, and there were hundreds upon hundreds of people there, not social distancing, nobody wearing masks, and it was just amazing to see. Everybody congregate in that same area. And there's also a push here in Lethbridge in southern Alberta to have the mayor institute a bylaw saying that everybody should wear masks indoors. So remains to see what's going to happen. Now, Brian, there's also a push to change policing across North America in the wake of George Floyd's death. In Calgary, Mayor Naheed Nenshi is warning about a tough discussion after unanimous vote on police funding called for a review. And in Toronto, there was a lot of graffiti and denunciation of police racism, which Toronto's Black police chief doesn't actually agree with.
Mark Saunders has taken issue with this, and it's interesting that there's a couple of the people that were arrested for graffiti on places like statues at Queen's Park, including Sir John A. Macdonald. Well, they're hardly visible minorities. They're very white liberals. One apparently a school teacher. So there's a lot of questions about how, is this really about anti-Black racism? Is it about politics? Mark Saunders is someone who came up through the ranks in Toronto's police force and became a Black man leading the biggest police force in the country. And he talks about communities which are predominantly people of color, and the fact that they call and say, look, we don't need you to go away. We need you here. There's a guy named Jamil Javani, who is an advisor to Premier Ford, who has called defunding of police a ridiculous idea that won't help the communities those advocating for claim it will. And in fact, many of the people advocating for this don't live in communities that are dealing with high levels of crime and violence. And those would be the first affected if we had a defunding movement. By the way, for anyone that thinks defunding just means cut the police budget a little bit, no, you need to listen to them carefully. There are some people calling for that, and that's a valid discussion. I've long been a critic of police budgets that go up every year without any thinking. But if you're just going to follow the defund police movement, you will find that some people want police gone completely. And that, I think, would be a disaster.
Brian, let's talk a bit now about the federal Tory leadership race. We recently had Aaron O'Toole on our program discussing such. And then there's also Peter MacKay, Leslyn Lewis, Derek Sloan. What have you heard? Who are the main frontrunners right now?
Well, right now it is still a main race between Aaron O'Toole and Peter MacKay. There is a path to victory, I think, for Leslyn Lewis, although it's a thin path. I don't see a path to victory for Derek Sloan. So there's two social conservatives in the race, Derek Sloan and Leslyn Lewis. Leslyn Lewis, if you're looking at the groups that back them respectively, she has more of the support of groups like the Canada Christian College, headed up by Charles McVitie in Toronto. Derek Sloan, more the LifeSite News crowd. It's not homogenous between either one of them, but generally those are the groups backing those two. But Leslyn Lewis has been able to break away from just being the social conservative candidate and has attracted more people through other issues in a way that Derek Sloan hasn't been able to. So is there a way for her to get in through the race? Absolutely. Peter MacKay and his team think they've got this sewn up on the first ballot. Simple fact of the matter is they've sold less than 50,000 memberships from what I've been told by McKay insiders, less than 50,000 memberships, there are 269,000 members. Well, unless there's a good chunk of those existing members backing you, you're not going to win on the first ballot. If Leslyn Lewis finishes high enough, she's hoping that Derek Sloan supporters go to her second, and that then maybe there's enough of a anybody but Peter or Aaron view to push her over the top. There are a number of people that I've spoken to who said, look, Aaron O'Toole, Peter MacKay, both good men, but neither one's exciting me. I'm voting Leslyn on the first ballot. If enough of that happens, we could have what we describe in Ontario as the Bob Rae effect. I'm voting for Bob Rae out of protest. What, the NDP won? So that could happen here. Like I said, it's a narrow path to victory. Outside of that happening, it's a tough battle between O'Toole and MacKay, and we'll see, who of the three that have potential comes out on top.
I wonder if people are willing to give Leslyn Lewis a shot as well, because she's not a professional politician that worked quite well for Donald Trump in the last federal election down in the States. So maybe they want somebody new and refreshing instead of MacKay and O'Toole, who are professional politicians, right?
I think that she has benefited a great deal by the fact that a lot of this campaign has been a virtual campaign, and she's done very well on social media. She did not perform as well in the debates as a lot of people think. I'll cut her some slack on the French debates. French is, not her second language. She tried her best. But even in English, she didn't perform up to expectations. So she still needs some polish. She needs to become a better speaker. And if she wins, she's going to have a big learning curve ahead of her. But the fact that this has mainly been fought through, mail to your door or email or Twitter, that's helped her a lot, because she's tapped into issues that a lot of Conservatives feel the professional politicians just aren't talking about, or not talking about in ways that resonate with them.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.